Great welcome to everyone. Thank you for coming to the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Thank you for coming here a little early. We have clearly an interested and engaged audience, so we're going to get right started. I want to welcome Senator Durbin and Congressman Larson. Thank you so much for being here. I want to also thank our co-sponsors, Nick Neihart, who's the President and CEO of Public Campaign, and Bob Edgar, who is the President and CEO of Common Cause. I want to thank you so much for your partnership and for being here and for all of your great work. We're on a tight schedule this morning for a couple of reasons. As some of you may have heard, the Senate is working on, I think it's health care, small issue. We're lucky to have a senator here. And Mr. Larson, the Majority Whip, needs to get back home, unfortunately, to attend a funeral, and he is going to duck out a little bit before the program ends. Although we'll have Senator Durbin here for a bit longer. So let's get right into this. Now, my friends here need no introduction, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that Senator Durbin is the senior senator, obviously, from the state of Illinois. And I always like to note that Time magazine has called him one of the America's 10 best senators. I'm not really sure who the 9 are above him, but he's a great friend of the senators, and we're
only 90 senators disagree.
There you go. And Congressman Larson began serving in the House from Connecticut in 1999, and I think as a credit to his leadership and the work that he's done on so many issues, was elected by his peers to serve as the chair of the House Democratic Caucus. And that is not an easy task, and it is certainly not an easy task in these days, like herding cats, exactly. So we've got 2 powerhouses with us today for a discussion about how federal campaigns are funded, and as importantly as how, by whom. I think we're seeing an unprecedented ability for citizens to organize and participate in the political process, using the internet at very little cost, and obviously being galvanized by campaigns. This includes small contributions to political campaigns. Obviously, President Obama's campaign took advantage of the energy. It's estimated that there were 3.7 million small donors to his campaign. He collected over $246 million in contributions of $200 or less, which compared to George Bush was quite a dramatic increase. George Bush raising only $64 million from such contributions. I think at the same time, though, the Supreme Court is showing an increased skepticism regarding attempts to regulate campaign financing, including, I think, a hostility toward limiting the independent spending of corporations. And we're going to talk a little bit about the courts and legislation. We don't know yet how the court is going to rule in Citizens United, but it's likely that the decision will pave the way for increased campaign activity by corporations and other independent groups. We're going to talk a little bit about the Fair Elections Now Act, which aims to relieve that fundraising pressure. And I'm just going to sort of open it right up and ask Senator Durbin. We'll get to the specifics of the legislation soon, but why are you working on this legislation sort of to change the way you and your colleagues are raising money?
Thanks, Winnie, for the question, and thank you for being here. The numbers tell the story. The average winning Senate candidate in 2008 spent $8.5 million. That's the winner. The average losing Senate candidate in the same cycle, $4.3 million. It costs over $4 million to lose running for the United States Senate. It is beyond the reach of average people and requires folks to enlist in a system which many would like to avoid, because even those with the highest integrity and character feel somewhat compromised when you spend every waking moment begging for money. It permeates the entire political process. I can't tell you how many hours we spend as senators speaking with one another about how we're going to raise money and how much time we're spending raising money. The so-called power hours, which, if you hadn't heard of it before, is when a senator takes an hour out of a day and sits in front of a telephone at the respective campaign headquarters trying to raise money for the cause. It usually is the lunch hour and you're munching on a sandwich hoping that somebody answers the phone. But it becomes a preoccupation in terms of what we're doing. Let me also just say that most of us are following the health care debate, the biggest domestic debate of our time. The House managed to work on it under House rules and House tradition and get it done in fairly short order. In the Senate, naturally, it's going to take much longer, and it has. But what you're seeing on Capitol Hill is, I think, only part of the story of this fight for health care reform. It reminds me of the old analogy of watching people playing ping pong above the table and tossing bowling balls at one another below the table. Well, what's going on below the table has been reported by the press in terms of money being spent. This is an Associated Press story of just a couple weeks ago, that so far the Chamber of Commerce, opposing health care, has spent $24 million on television commercials, to $12 million spent by labor unions and other backers supporting. So the ground effort, state by state, sometimes neighborhood by neighborhood, is being funded by these large groups interested in the passage and defeat of this legislation. If, as Winnie referred to, the Supreme Court opens the door wide and says, there are no limits, what we see on health care reform, we will see in individual campaigns. What John and I are trying to do is to give every candidate for the House and Senate a voluntary opportunity and a fighting chance. Not to match dollar for dollar what they can come up with, but to make certain that your message is heard. I think we have a reasonable approach to do it.
Fantastic. And Congressman Larson, if you talk a little bit about